and be friends with the guy and talk to him, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. I really want to listen to that one. I'm planning to listen to it.
Yeah, we had a mention. We talked about you a little bit towards the end.
Oh yeah, what was the context?
We were talking about your critique of Jordan Peterson's book and how we would have you on and talk about it. So.
Oh, snaps!
Oh, right.
Let's do that first.
These guys love Jordan Peterson.
I just like to. I'm Canadian. I went to University of Toronto, so he was my advisor there.
Oh really? I went to Ryerson.
Oh really? Are you Canadian?
Yeah, I'm Canadian.
What part of Toronto are you from?
Scarborough.
Okay, yeah, I went to U of T for like 2.5 years, and I flunked out because I was selling Amway soap.
Oh, but I just went to Amway's headquarters in Grand Rapids.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Was it sick?
It was huge. They're
Dude,
making
Amway is no joke, man.
Yeah,
they're big time.
But did you know that Amway has the people in Grand Rapids have no idea what a pyramid scheme Amway is? So Amway doesn't do business in Grand Rapids.
Oh yeah.
So they don't bleep where they eat, you know? It's funny.
That's really interesting, actually.
Yeah.
That's kind of sick, man. I was like, Amway's probably created more millionaires in the United States than any other company in the world.
Yeah.
Or I don't know if that's true or not. That's what they used to tell us.
You said it with so much confidence, dude.
That's probably true. Say it enough. Anyways, let's not waste some time.
Right.
Let's get this puppy started. Are those potato chips in the background, by the way, Murtaza?
Say it again?
Are those potato chips in the background?
No, there's an AC running, though. I can turn it off.
Don't
No, it's
answer
cool.
the
It's
question.
cool.
That's cool.
It was
Oh,
a
you're in
setup.
Texas, right? It's like 120 degrees down there.
Oh, no, I'm in New York.
Oh, you're in New York. Oh, yo, we'll be there on Friday.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
He's like, I don't want to meet these guys.
Wait, are they
Actually, I'm in Texas.
are they inviting themselves to my house?
If you guys want to come by the office, you're more than welcome.
Oh, yeah, that would be awesome.
We're actually going to be in town. We're flying in Thursday night. We're actually doing a collaboration podcast with Safina Society.
That's Dr. Shadi El-Masri's podcast.
Oh, yeah, right.
So we come in Thursday night, and then I think our flight arrives like 1 a.m. in Newark. We're staying in Central Jersey, but we'll take the train up probably on Friday to New York. 'Cause they don't have anything planned for us on Friday. We don't do any recording till Saturday. So we're just going to chill. I got to buy some sneakers and like sweatpants.
Yeah.
So I got to go solo.
How many guys are you coming?
3 of us.
If you want, on Friday night, we do a Zikr in the city.
Where at? I'm down.
Like Midtown.
Okay.
Yeah, if you guys want, you're more than welcome.
All right. Cool. Well, yeah, we'll see what Sim will take your number. He's probably got you on. You got his number. Or something,
Yeah, I got
Twitter or
his
something.
message on.
Yeah, so we can figure something out. I heard Honest Shops is the spot to try out, and Joe's Pizza.
Yeah, they're very good spots.
All right, nice. Okay.
Cool. All right, we're live.
Yes. Assalamualaikum, Mamluk Nation. We are here with Murtaza Hussain, the journalist from the Intercept, whose work focuses on national security, foreign policy, and human rights. His work has been previously featured in the New York Times, The Guardian, and Al Jazeera English. So, first of all, the Intercept is like that kind of like rogue publication that is like kind of independent, right? It's like a lot of folks are into it. How did you break into that kind of work yourself, being like a brown guy with a perceived like glass ceiling?
Yeah, I think that because of the internet and social media, a lot of dynamics have changed, power dynamics in the media world. They haven't completely changed, but people who from, non-elite backgrounds and brown people and black people able to have more of a voice in the public discourse, just because, you can't really be ignored if you're on social media, if what you're saying resonates with people. And I think as a result of that, you've seen a lot of people who wouldn't have had a shot in media, if they're smart and they're able to do it, getting an opportunity to take roles in publications. And I started off, I was just blogging many years ago, maybe like 8-9 years ago. And then people liked the blog and they liked stuff I was writing, and I started writing for first Salon.com, then Al Jazeera English, and a few other places. And then I started working with the Intercept in 2013. I knew the founders, and particularly Glenn. And so it's been about 5 years as a reporter there. And the place has really grown in that time.
Well, I really was looking forward to this conversation because, growing up in the 90s, we had like people like Chomsky that we were looking up to as kids in terms of having independent voices in the media who are critiquing, the various ideologies that were prevalent at that time, capitalism and communism and all the different isms that were going on. And I think The Intercept is kind of along that vein. It's kind of an extension of people like Chomsky who were independent-minded and are critiquing the world. And some will say, you're critiquing it from a leftist perspective, but I think it does. Just reading your articles and the Intercept's articles in general, I think they do a pretty good job of being balanced.
Yeah, I think it definitely has, the image is one that's decidedly leftist, but I think that if you read the stuff we published, there really is quite a bit of ideological diversity. I wouldn't say we have anybody who's far right in the American sense of the term, but I think that there is quite a healthy debate that takes place on the site. And a lot of the reporting is not necessarily ideological. It's just reporting. It's investigative reporting from which people can draw conclusions that they like. And we have some people actually, they are deemed to be sort of right. Some people who, write regularly on U.S. politics. They have iconoclastic positions. And maybe you can call them right, but you could say that they're anti-establishment. And I would say that I wouldn't want to be a publication that's just a leftist publication, quote unquote, because you don't want to be ideological. You want to be interested in truth and growing and not being wedded to any orthodoxies, whatever they are. You should just be equal. Yeah.
So, like, the fact that you said you're interested in truth, that I assume then you would have some pro-Trump people on your staff.
I wouldn't say that.
No. Don't listen to him.
Some people might say that, but I wouldn't say that. I don't think anyone. I don't know.
No,
it's hard to say.
I don't subscribe to the idea that you necessarily have to have someone completely on the opposite end of the spectrum to balance things out. I think people, just like how you mentioned, people who are intellectually honest, those kind of people are people who you really want. It doesn't really have to be spectrum based. People who are just willing to concede when they're wrong, maybe not necessarily even concede, but even shift their views a little bit and tweak their message when appropriate. But
the thing is, I actually would say that I think these categories of left and right, they've really broken down over the last decade or so. And I think that the inherited categories no longer really make much sense, because if you look at the roots of these categories, they come from political polarity. They come from the French Revolution. They have very, very old roots. And then they took a new form during the Industrial Revolution and they were over the division of power between different sectors in industrial society, working people, capital, etc. But now the real division in society is not about that. It's about globalization. So when you see people who consider themselves far left aligning sometimes people who consider themselves far right, it's because they're on the same side of the issue of globalization. So I think that we need to reimagine these categories because they don't even make any sense. There's very few people, I think, who left who are orthodox Marxists or even fascists, per se, in the old mold. We just, there's not really a term left for people anymore. Just left and right is just what we have left over.
Along the time when you guys came out, I remember Vice News as well came out. And I remember, me and Sheikh Amr first discovering Vice News when the whole ISIS thing started. And we were thinking, holy cow, this is like independent journalism. People who are just indie cameramen and reporters just embedding themselves into the front lines and, getting just things that war journalists and other journalists of the 70s and 80s would have only dreamed about, having that kind of having that kind of a platform to display all their work, because usually in the past, war journalists and journalists in general just only had like a column or, a specific time slot that they can fit all the knowledge that they acquired from their research into. And now you have like things like YouTube and the Intercept and podcasts where you can really explain a lot of the ideas that or a lot of the information that you're capturing from media or from their research. And I was curious in terms of how you feel people are getting more enlightened to a lot of the things that are going on. In terms of, because I know you were like tweeting a little bit about how people are so uninformed about global affairs, and it just seems like you're fighting a tide of misinformation all the time. It seems like people just aren't able to catch up to the fast-moving global climate or the winds of change.
Yeah, I mean, it's in one way the huge deluge of information is good in the sense that the news was basically centered around a few major power centers, and you could really monopolize a discourse on any one issue. I think we have the opposite problem now, that there's so many different sources of information that it's very difficult for people to discern who's speaking with any authority or credibility. And it's very overwhelming. Like, I am a journalist and I find it very hard to keep up with the amount of information that there is. And I find myself actually reading more books than articles, because books, at least you can focus on one subject and you know that most likely it's went through a rigorous editing process before it's published. I think I'm not actually too optimistic about the future when it comes to information, because I don't know how we're going to actually find a way of narrowing down and focusing on information just so we can all have a common narrative. There's just so many articles and so many videos out there today. Everyone can live in their own alternate reality, and people can't do. You see things like the Syria conflict. There's just such a deluge of propaganda, including state propaganda, that it's almost impossible to know, for the average person or even a well-intentioned person, to discern truth from falsehood. And I kind of think,
I mean, people who are, especially the average American or the average citizen of the world, and how they're caught up in the day-to-day 9 to 5, them taking their news seriously and how they consume it. It seems like they just where they're not going to be able to find the right outlet that is actually interested in truth, And I remember just being on a ski trip recently, a couple of years ago actually, and some of the guys were bored and they were like flipping through YouTube, and they're like, "Oh my God, look at this Vice thing that had the Islamic State, their documentary ad." I'm like, "Dude, that's actually like 4 years old. Like, how are you just catching up to this now?" I'm like, "Who's this Vice News?" And this is like a group of 6 or 10 guys, and I'm like, "Yo, man, this is kind of old news." And it was so like it was so shocking in the sense, because people just don't really. I mean, you and I take it seriously, but most people just don't take the news seriously, and they just are kind of either interested in word of mouth, or they're really just caring about who other people are talking about. Maybe a celebrity might have endorsed a certain website or something, and made an appearance on a website, and then they'll find out about it. But other than that, it just seems like it's an uphill battle. But
one thing,
go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, I was just going to agree with you. Yeah.
No, one thing that I sensed is that a majority of people that do read the news is kind of just to forget about their issues. For men especially, it's kind of like their cave time, right? When they had a hard day at work and they want to read something when they're at work and they need a break, we usually think about things so our problems, we minimize our problems. And whatever outlet that is, that kind of gives us a distraction from our lives. That's kind of what I see, not only just with the men, but people in general. They basically forget, and it's kind of like an outlet, like you said. It's an outlet for them. It's an outlet.
It's like, I think
it's almost entertainment for them. It's an outlet, and they're not really concerned about truth. to the level of truth that we're talking about. They're more concerned with, okay, now I'm kind of informed what's happening. Okay, I'm good.
But it's not just about getting information. I think a lot of people just see it as stress. They see a mountain of problems.
Oh yeah, that's
I know,
for sure
like
too.
just flipping through Facebook's feed or Twitter's feed and just being stressed out about all the different things that are happening.
No, you're right. And I always hear people say, like, man, I'm done reading the news. I gave up. I hear people say that all the time.
It's horrific. It's like some of the horrific stories that you hear about, just brutal oppression around the world, and you're just like, what the hell's wrong with people? You know, how could one human be like that to another human? And I can understand some people willfully not paying attention to it in that respect, but what kind of publications do you read other than your own, Murtaza?
That's a good question. I kind of finding new publications these days and finding people with really smart blogs and just random things I never picked up before. But I really like, I read the Intercept. I read the major publications like the New York Times, the Washington Post. Jacobin, it's a good left-wing publication. But I don't really have any ones that I check regularly. I just kind of see what people who I trust are sharing, and I can tell if it's a reputable site or not. But then also I just read a lot of books. Most of my reading is books, probably like 70-80% of it. I don't read that many articles at all. Just because I find like the screen to be distracting, and I don't want to have so much screen time. And I find when you read books about any subject, you really get much more fuller understanding, and your mind has to focus on one subject for quite a while. And when pages, there's no notifications going off in the background to distract you. It's just you with a book. And I just try to read books constantly. Yeah. Because unlike articles too, you tend to remember every book you read, and the lessons tend to sink in quite a bit more.
Yeah, I agree. I think also the problem is when, like you say, you read articles and it's like your mind's spinning in 30 different directions. Because, like, I was trying to read an article. Was it today about like Cristiano Ronaldo going to Juventus, and it's like it should be like 5-minute read, but it took me like half an hour because I had like 5 other windows open, right? And you were clicking back and forth, and then you forgot what you read, and it's just like, I mean, it's just like whatever. Just whereas I was actually out in my wife and I were on vacation a couple weeks ago, and we were in an area where I didn't even have like internet. So I was like, I had no choice but to read a book. And then he's like, but I actually remember, and I got a lot more depth out of that reading than any kind of like article, even on the same subject. Oh,
this is when you went to Yellowstone, right?
Yeah.
How was that?
I missed the World Cup semifinal, so I was pissed.
Oh man!
But one thing that I was curious about is, do you do any? And pardon my ignorance, do you do any investigative reporting too?
Yeah, absolutely.
That's awesome. So, one thing that I was always curious about: investigative reporters usually have, not only are they what I've witnessed from them is that they're very well versed about what's happening in the world, but they seem to know a lot about history, and they're able to link the information that they read about contemporary issues with history, right? So that's the question is, like, investigative reporters, a lot of people depend upon them, right? And they get a big following. So, like, what type of content do you read, and would you suggest for someone to read to get a good picture, not only of what you would do but as your profession, but to be well informed, to be on that same track of being informed properly, right? Aside from websites and articles, I'm talking about like books in specific.
Oh, okay. And regarding like global affairs,
everything as far as linking, contemporary issues to books that you guys may link to historically, right? Because every time I see an investigative reporter, they always bring history into it too, because you have to convince people that, hey, this happened before. Right, not only in our near past, but a long time ago, and it's just repeating itself to build a strong case. So, what is it only politics that you read up on? Is there any other books that sharpen those skills too?
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. The majority of my reading is history. It's not even contemporary politics. So, in the last couple of years, especially in the time the Intercept existed, and even before that, the U.S. has been fighting this quote-unquote war on terrorism, and this is taking place overwhelmingly in Muslim countries.
Yep.
And it's given rise to all sorts of movements and groups and responses. And, the big one is people's mind the last couple of years with ISIS. So when this came about, as a Muslim person, you're very shocked that a group of people who call themselves Muslims could do all these things, which everything you're taught growing up is totally antithetical to those values. So I really took it very seriously to try to understand and unpack the roots of these sort of ideologies and to understand Islam better, understand revolutionary movements better, understand the roots of, the collapse of state structures in the Muslim world, to how they give rise to sort of these sort of non-state actors. So much of my study has been about that type of history of modernity in the Muslim world. And there's so many books that are just invaluable to understanding that. Pankaj Mishra's books about post-colonialism and
whose books? I'm
movements.
Sorry. Can you mention that? Because I'm actually writing these down.
Oh yeah, actually, I have this app. In addition to Twitter, I got this app called Goodreads, and I save all my books that I read on there with reviews of the books.
Oh, cool.
So I can send you a list of the books I really recommend on the subject.
I'll put in the show notes.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, cool.
Because it's sometimes like when I'm confused about something, I just need a place to start. And sometimes when you go through websites, you just end up reading so much. Either you don't remember it or you didn't read everything of all of what you were supposed to read, right? So you just chase a whole bunch of little details.
People, you had no context. You can't really understand what you're reading in full.
No, and that's why I'm glad we're having this conversation, man, because I really want to switch to just reading, like hardcover and softcover books and kind of just not a major hiatus from reading on the internet, but I really need to take a break from that because the more reading you do, that you feel like you're not filling the pieces in properly, And at the end of like a year or 2 years of reading, there's not a solid connection.
Yeah. At the same time, though, don't you feel like we have to like kind of, pick and choose what we're reading as far as like what subject matter? Because otherwise you might, think about a subject that you really know about, right? And think about like what it took to get expertise in that subject. Right? Yeah. It's not, you can't do everything, right?
You're right.
True. And that's such an important point you brought up because I remember when I was young, so many things just kind of went over my head. I know, especially reading like Chomsky, it's very heavy reading. It's very and for a teenager, a lot of stuff doesn't just resonate well, but you know that so many of your friends or people you trust in the media have used him as a reference. So you're just kind of powering through it just because of your interest or your passion for that, right? And I think eventually it permeates into your mind. You might not understand a whole lot of it. A lot of the criticisms that we've had for our podcast in terms of some of the things that we discuss related to philosophy and some of the great thinkers of the past, a lot of those topics I've been told that are literally going over people's heads and they just can't wrap their minds around it because they've never thought about things in such a deep level throughout their lives, and they just can't begin to do that at such a late age, I guess. But what I wanted to also ask you about was Jeremy Scahill, because Sheikh Amr brought up investigative journalists, and that guy was the first guy I knew about from the Intercept before you hopped on. And have you met the guy? Because he's somebody who me and Sheikh Amr, we saw his documentary Dirty Wars.
Sam introduced me to Dirty Wars, and I'm a high school teacher, and we have a contemporary issues class, so I just showed that video a few years ago to all my students. We had an exam on it, so we really like on that level what Intercept is doing and what Jeremy Scahill and obviously yourself. But
Jeremy's got his own podcast too. Have you heard it, Murtaza?
Yeah, of course. So Jeremy, we all work in the same office. His podcast is actually recorded in his little room that he has in the office, the recording studio.
Is this the same office you were inviting us to in New York?
Yeah, that's the one.
Dang. Okay. You know what? Invitation accepted.
Although I'm not 100% sure if he's in town right now.
No, we're going there for you, not for him, bro.
I just want to sit on the same chair he does.
I just want to sit on the same chair he does.
No, I love the guy, man. When you see Dirty Wars, you see a man who's passionate. That's just, you can't fake that. There's no other way of saying. I mean, what he did was like incredibly brave because, the whole Anwar al-Awlaki thing was just something that is really I mean, getting behind his family and people, despite your disagreements with him as a person and what his ideological leanings are, of course, but the way he defended his family. Is everything okay, Murtaza?
It sounds like bones crackling.
Something happened.
I heard like some crackling.
Are you getting your back cracked by a chiropractor right now?
Water policy.
Oh, I thought you had a chiropractor. You're at a chiropractor visit right now.
Oh, no.
I'm just joking. Just get used to it. We're gonna make a lot of jokes, so don't mind.
So what's Dirty? I've never heard of this.
You
movie.
never
You never heard Dirty Wars, bro?
Oh
Is
man,
it about Vietnam?
How dare you?
It's about what Murtaza mentioned. Murtaza, why don't you explain to Mahin what Dirty Wars is about?
Dirty Wars is a book and a documentary that was made by Jeremy a few years ago. I think it was nominated for an Oscar. The documentary was. It's just it's a history of the war on terrorism, or the shadow wars that have been fought. And a significant component of it is about the story of Anwar al-Awlaki, who was a famous imam in the United States, who later went on to have a very troubled history with the government. Then he was killed in a drone strike that was ordered under Obama, and his son was killed in a subsequent strike as well. And he was very controversial because he was an American citizen. Many people are killed by drones, but it was a big deal because it was not generally accepted that the U.S. president has a right to order the execution of
without a due
a
process.
citizen without trial. Yeah,
and then his
exactly.
son a few weeks later, and then his daughter recently.
Yeah.
Right, his daughter a year ago. I mean.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Right.
But he also, have you heard of Blackwater? The book Blackwater. He wrote that same book too. Just look it up. You watch it on Netflix tonight. You'll be happy.
I think it is available on Netflix. So if anyone's interested, make sure you check it out on Netflix.
What, Dirty Wars is on Netflix?
Yeah.
Sick. I'll check it out.
One of the main questions that a lot of our listeners are always messaging us is, hey, have someone on who can kind of explain some of the entanglement of alliances that are happening in the Middle East. Help give them a brief outline. We're not going to go through the historical thing, but let's have Murtaza explain a little bit about why Qatar and Saudi are at odds with each other. Where does Turkey fit into this? Where does Iran fit into it? And Egypt, some of the major players, and why are they all mad at each other?
And why is poor Yemen getting the hell bombed out of them?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the rivalry between Qatar and Saudi Arabia, in 2013, there was a wave of revolutions in the Middle East, known at that time as the Arab Spring. Saudi Arabia is a monarchy, and it's very much invested in the status quo. They didn't want any changes in the region. They didn't want their friends in Egypt or elsewhere to be overthrown. So they really invested a lot in holding up those dictatorships and trying to keep them stable, because the way things were, it was to their benefit. But Qatar also was a monarchy, and it's part of the same regional alliance as the Saudi Arabia is, the GCC. But they took a very different tack with regard to the Arab Spring, and they supported the revolutionary movements, including the Muslim Brotherhood, which is Saudi Arabia is absolutely hostile to, because they view them as a threat to their own establishment. And, there's been tensions over the Arab Spring ever since. And then when the last couple of years, especially when Trump came into office, the Saudis have really seen his opportunity to settle score with Qatar and punish them. And essentially they want them to surrender any independent foreign policy. They want them to close Al Jazeera, which is owned by the Qatari government. So that's sort of the roots. It's a conflict between a status quo power, Saudi Arabia, and a power which wants to, or supportive of revising the dynamics in the region, including in favor of more towards Islamist parties like the Brotherhood, which is Qatar. So that's sort of where that falls into place. And Turkey is very much aligned with Qatar, actually. They also, the ruling party in Turkey is, aligned, or in a sense, it's on the same spectrum as the Muslim Brotherhood. And they also are very much were supportive of the opposition movements of the Arab Spring. In Yemen, it's sort of a different situation. There's a civil war in Yemen, and Saudi Arabia is intervening on one side of the civil war. And there was a conflict there before Saudi Arabia got involved, but Saudi Arabia's involvement, along with the U.S. and the U.K., has certainly exacerbated the crisis there. And they've been bombing Yemen for a number of years now in what seems to be a pretty futile attempt to end the conflict in their own favor. But, this is a very upsetting time, like the Muslim world and the Middle East especially. A lot of the countries have gone through complete catastrophes, and Syria is another example, and it doesn't seem like it's ending anytime soon.
Yeah, I mean, Syria is just such a mess. I mean, I remember when the Syrian crisis broke out, I was so familiar with, all the players in the fighting. I knew like battalions and stuff. There were entire subreddits on Reddit that were created just for keeping track of the conflict. I mean, it was so fascinating to see in the sense that you saw average Americans rooting for battalions. They had like their own like team that they were kind of rooting for, even though they had like really no vested interest in who actually came out front. There were some people who were, but it was just fascinating to see average Americans kind of.
And a lot of people weren't even Muslim. They were just guys that were very, very curious about Syria because, of the situation.
But what's so amazing is that all these major players are pretty much dead that were alive a couple of years ago. People who were common names that you would use when you're talking about the crisis over there. All those leaders are dead, and then the line of succession has probably reached their fourth or fifth, and those people are dying, and it just seems like where's the end? Because it seems like, after airstrikes after airstrikes, they thought that they could just, kill off the heads of the revolution over there, and it's not going to end. And it just seems like it's such a complicated mess over there.
Yeah, it is. It's just a big tragedy for the people of the Syria and the region generally.
I mean, I'm pretty convinced that if it wasn't for ISIS, they would have for sure had the entirety of Syria, the rebels, right?
Yeah, it's so hard to do a counterfactual history of it, but so many things happened. There's so many, the whole world got involved in different ways, and definitely the emergence of terrorist groups in that conflict changed the dynamic and also the narrative of what was happening.
Well, a lot of people were so amazed that the Americans didn't take a stronger stance and allowed the Russians and the Syrians to take a more of a foothold in the Middle East by getting themselves involved in there. And the Americans are kind of like, well, we don't want to support one side too much. We just kind of let's make it a stalemate and give enough weapons to the rebels so that they don't get easily trounced.
Yeah, and I think that some of the confusion, people don't realize, what the benefits are in this proxy war, between America and Russia. And, in easy terms and layman terms, how would you simplify that to somebody who says, I hear people say that all the time, what benefit does America have supporting the rebels and Russia supporting, Bashar? What is it beneficial? What's the benefit here? Is it because America is siding with Saudi and they have to prove this? I mean, how do we make sense of all that?
Well, I think from the U.S. perspective, they were totally fine to see everyone, all sides, killing each other. They weren't very invested in either side. And they had a hostile relationship with Assad's allies. And at the same time, they didn't really like the rebels either. So what they did was exactly what you said. They fed enough weapons to the conflict to keep it going forever, pretty much, on slow burn, but not enough that any side would win. And Russia, for all the brutalities and cruelties of what they did, getting involved in the conflict and completely imperialist intervention that's killed tens of thousands of people, they did pick a side. They picked one side decisively and backed them until they won. The United States did not do that. They never picked a side definitively. They made rhetorical support to the opposition, and they provided some nominal support, again, just to keep the killing going, but not enough that anyone would win. So I find that the U.S. role was extremely malign. I think that Obama bears a lot of responsibility for that. Whether it was part of a conscious plan or it just ended up happening out of just a drift, it's hard to say. But, they made sure a war continued for years and years with no winner. And that's a recipe for the deaths of hundreds of thousands of people. It's exactly what we saw.
Yeah.
The country was destroyed.
It's a disaster. It's become a disaster. With Syria, what used to be Syria is, Allahu Alam if it's ever going to be the same in the future. And,
I mean, you think about a city like Aleppo, had so much history, and those marketplaces were known throughout the world for having such a strong tradition, and they're just bombed to nothing now.
Yeah.
Right.
And then we have what's going on in Egypt now. Egypt is still with Sisi, and Sisi's just seems like he's getting some support from the Saudis and the Americans in terms of propping up their economy and making sure that there's not another collapse. But it seems like his regime is dependent on how well their economy is doing, and as soon as the Egyptians experience another economic collapse, I think his regime is going to go with it. I just don't see the Egyptians, sitting out for a long period of economic turmoil. I think that's what really gets people into action. I think once you can't feed your family, people are going to go on the streets. So I don't see that as a long-term regime. At least.
It seems like there's a lot of bandage work happening in Egypt, man. That's what it seems like. Just hanging by strings and just,
What's your assessment? What's up?
Yeah, it's Egypt is one country that's it doesn't really have a history of mass political violence. There's been a lot of violence in terms of incidents and certain outbreaks of conflict, but they never had any internal civil war like we've seen in Syria, other places, and Egyptians tend to be quite proud of that actually. So I'm not sure that you are going to see that, but I think you could see a country which is gradually immiserated more and more over time, and outbreaks of unrest or vocalized insurgencies like you see in the Sinai. But also people have a very high capacity for suffering in a lot of places, and you think that something's not sustainable, and it just exists for a long time. And the Soviet Union, extremely repressive, extremely poor place. It lasted for almost a century.
Yeah.
A lot of places just, people, South Asia, there's incredible poverty in South Asia. And until very recently, it never really seemed like there was any way out of that. It just continued. So I'm not, confident things are going to change necessarily. And sometimes when people are poor, they're even less able to resist.
That's true. I'm wondering what's next with and I think the way I kind of decipher the Middle East is I look at America on one side and the Russians on another side, and you can critique this if you want, but I'm kind of looking at America is using the Saudis, Egypt, and Turkey more or less as their proxies in the Middle East, and Russia utilizing Iran and maybe more or less Qatar in some respect, even though Qatar denies it and says that we're not part of anyone. Is that the correct lens to view the Middle East as Russia on one side of the table and America on the other side, and they're kind of playing chess with these countries?
Actually, I don't think so. I think that there's this sense that the U.S. and Russia are in this big conflict. I don't think that's the case at all. I think that they're putting forward an image of this really fierce conflict, and they're certainly speaking like that. But if you look at their actions, they're completely cooperating. They're cooperating to carve Syria up and end the conflict in a way in which they're both satisfied with. They are negotiating over what to do about Iran. I think that really all these countries, there's just two imperial powers which are working together, and dividing them up in stages. I don't think that there's a big conflict between them.
So that is a fantastic way of looking at it, because was my secondary analysis. I thought that maybe everyone's cooperating and they're just creating conflicts, or maybe not, just controlled conflicts to sell weapons to rival neighbors in the countries, and selling a product to a country, saying that, hey, this is for your well-being and your self-interest and your self-preservation. I think that's a better way to sell, weapons that you don't really need, and that money could be spent better.
Yeah, they both support Israel. They both support Egypt. They both support. They're in good terms with all these countries. They basically have the same end result in mind for Syria now. There's a little bit of division over Iran, which they're trying to sort out now. No, I don't. They're absolutely just working together to carve up the Middle East, and this region has been carved up by imperial powers before, Russia and the UK. And now it's U.S. and Russia, U.S. and Russia. Yeah, I don't see any conflict there, and I think this whole thing is when you strip away the rhetoric and look at the actions, it's just it's a farce. It's not what's really going on.
What I think is it's being driven by the military-industrial complex, right? The sale of weapons throughout the world is, something that the American economy depends heavily on, and I don't think it's stressed enough in media. It could be stressed by publications such as yours, but in terms of mass media, people just don't realize how dependent the American economy is on the sale of weapons to the world.
Yeah, absolutely. And you look at countries like Saudi Arabia, they're the biggest arms purchasers in the world. And even small countries like these Gulf countries, UAE, Qatar, etc., they buy a lot of arms from the U.S. and from Europe and from Russia, but they don't actually use these arms generally. They don't, like Saudi Arabia doesn't fight wars itself, except for now in Yemen to some degree, as an air force. But by purchasing weapons in such huge amounts, they're making themselves economically indispensable to the U.S. and its allies. So, for instance, if your economy relies on Saudi Arabia buying X number of missiles every year and spending X billion of dollars, you're going to be invested in wanting to defend Saudi Arabia's security because you want them to keep buying weapons from you. And weapons are really a vanity purchase. When they buy them, they're either going to be used to kill somebody or they're going to just sit in a warehouse somewhere forever. And they're very expensive. You can't use them to build your economy or build your society. They just sort of, they're a waste or they're used for some horrible purpose. Yeah. So, by buying these weapons, by Saudi Arabia being such a regular purchaser of U.S. weapons, it makes people in the U.S. elites at least, very, very attached to ensuring that Saudi Arabia is stable and secure, because we need it to keep being an outlet for these lethal goods.
Gotcha. So what's the scoop on, I know a lot of people have asked us too about UAE. I don't think we've talked about UAE today yet, but there's that alliance between Saudi and UAE and their boycott of Qatar, and then also this dilemma of, some Muslim scholars in the West, being pro-UAE, promoting UAE, etc.
Yeah, I'm really disappointed to see some scholars embracing the UAE so publicly. Because, if a Muslim scholar, your prime goal should be to commitment to morality and speaking truth to power. And the UAE is a very repressive government, and they're involved in extremely supporting very repressive policies around the Middle East. And some people I really respect seem to be very close to them and very aligned with them. And I'm sure I kind of understand in some way why, because the UAE is in conflict with the Muslim Brotherhood. And these scholars, a lot of them are lead movements which are in conflict with the Muslim Brotherhood. And in a way that makes sense. But then you also have to look at the bigger picture. What kind of policies is the UAE supporting? What's their position on, let's say, Israel-Palestine? Are they supporting dictatorships that are committing atrocities against innocent people? And you have to ask yourself whether it's the right thing to do to endorse such a government. And hopefully you would ask it to change its ways before endorsing it, or, guarantee some sort of reform. But we haven't really seen that as far as we can tell. We've just seen people willing to lend their names and credibility to government, which in many ways has deeply troubling policies.
So if the issue is their opposition to the Muslim Brotherhood, then how come we don't see them carrying the banner of Saudi as well?
I think the UAE is the one that's trying to cultivate these people, and the Saudis have their own different religious establishment, sort of more of the Salafi Wahhabi establishment that is a very close alliance with the ruling family. They don't want to patronize these other types of scholars. You'd call them Sunni traditional scholars. The UAE is not a Wahhabi. They don't have a Wahhabi establishment or a Salafi establishment. They have a very flexible ideological establishment. They like to think of themselves as modernizers too. So they want a modernized, enlightened Islam, which is a completely fine thing to want. But what they're doing is they're trying to use Islam as a tool of soft power. And if you're a scholar, your loyalty should not be to any government. It should be to what's right and what's wrong, or against what's wrong. So, I mean, maybe they know what they're doing. Maybe they have it very well thought out. This is something that they've, as part of a plan for what they think is best. But it looks troubling because the UAE is certainly involved in supporting some of the nastiest regimes around today. And they've also been involved in throwing American Muslims under the bus. The UAE designated CARE as a terrorist group, and the UAE official went on Fox News to talk about that. So they're completely fine with Islamophobia and allying with right-wing Americans who totally are hostile. Hostile is putting it lightly towards Muslims and Islam. So, why a Muslim scholar would go and support such a government, it's really questionable. And I hope that...
Why don't you talk to your people? Sheikh.
But do you think it's possible that they think it's has a potential that, they're, thinking that it might have the infrastructure or whatnot or economy to be an ideal Muslim land, so they're trying to get their foot in the door now? I don't know who knows, but
yeah, I mean, it's possible. It's definitely, but if that's what they think, they should let everybody else know, because everyone else is very surprised and wondering what's going on, right?
Yeah, and the thing is, if you question it, they're like, oh, people are not, some of the fanboys are like, you're not having proper adab. I mean, some of these scholars are like, I love some of these guys, right? But so I don't really speak on the issue publicly. And I'm not gonna offer a commentary here or there, but when I observe people criticize them, people jump out of you're not having adab, this brother's done so much for this people, etc., for the ummah, yada yada yada. So they're not, they shouldn't be above reproach, even though they've done a tremendous amount of good for this specific stance.
Yeah, be careful of that adab card. That's always used whenever you're making a good point. That adab card is popped up for non-Muslims who are listening. It's adab means manners and etiquette and discourse.
Yeah,
and the thing is, they have done a lot, and they are really admirable people. So you want to give them the benefit of the doubt and understand. And I hope there is an explanation, and I hope there's some sort of context.
I think a lot of it is, man, that everyone has their own sense of what authority is and what they feel is the best type of authority, right? So whether it's on a political level or even scholars, there is a certain type of authority, and when someone openly challenges them, they see it as some type of lack of. The only way that they can make it burn is say, hey, you're not having adab. When you may be saying it nicely, you're just, not agreeing with them. And
also,
challenging authority.
There's this concept, the traditional Islamic concept of political philosophy is among Islamic scholars, is that you support order, you support the ruler, and you only call for a revolution or a change in the most extreme circumstance when the religion itself is being threatened. And historically, the form of government that existed in the Muslim world was monarchies or dynasties. They were not republics. They were not these sort of new kind of democracies or things that modern movements like the Muslim Brotherhood wants to put in place. They are very modern. So in that sense, supporting the UAE it makes sense Islamically in a way, you could say, because there's this famous quote by Imam al-Ghazali, which is that 1,000 years of tyranny are better than a single day of anarchy. So maybe the UAE is a tyranny, but they feel that's better than anarchy, which is something you may see in, let's say, Syria. Because some of the Sunni traditional scholars in Syria also supported the regime, even though the regime was viewed by other people as heretic and tyrannical. They supported it because the traditional political philosophy of Islam is very much towards order and towards stability and not in favor of anything that could lead to upheaval. So when you see them supporting the UAE, they're supporting the status quo and they're Islamic scholars, and that's sort of something that Islamic scholars have traditionally done. There's very, very few examples of...
The thing is, though, isn't it like... Because it's unique, though, but because these aren't like Emiratis. They're not Emirati scholars, or they're not like... Maybe one of them is, but like... I mean, one of them lives there, but a lot of them don't even live in the UAE. Right?
Well, I think...
Yeah.
I remember when we were talking to Shadi Hamid on our last episode, he was the discussion came about where Sheikh Amr was saying that when a lot of the government apparatus had broken down, the scholars were really free to talk about whatever they wanted, and things like Islamic governance were being discussed freely without any fear of repercussion. I think when you take out the government from scholars, they're able to speak more freely. I mean, you're seeing what happened to Sheikh Safar al-Hawali in Saudi Arabia, right? He got imprisoned, and even Salman al-Oda, many other scholars around the kingdom.
I read that they were sururis, though, and they were already like muqtadiyin.
I knew something like this was going to come out of your mouth. God. So these are government Salafi type terms that Mahin is using because he used to follow government Salafis when he was younger. What was that term? Sururi?
Sururi.
What does that mean?
They're followers of Muhammad Surur.
Who's that?
He's like some like basically some kind of ideologue who used to be a Muslim Brotherhood kind of guy.
Okay.
You know, basically like, and then the offshoots of Sururi or Qutubiyya. Which is a more extreme offshoot, like Sayyid Qutb's ideology.
Oh my gosh!
So there's entire PDFs dedicated to this if you want.
I'm sure there are.
Mahin used to read.
I used to print out I was an engineering student. Side note, and my friends would be like, "What are you printing out? Like hundreds and hundreds of PDF pages?" And I'm like, "Oh, this is like a refuge." Like there was a chart I had, an entire chart of like the offshoots from the Ikhwan, like the various offshoots. And they were like, you're burning up your entire lab quota. It's supposed to be on like statics and dynamics and thermo, and you're burning it up on like PDFs from Spubs and Troid.
Spubs and Troid, I remember those websites. That was the 90s.
2000s for me.
Yeah, early 2000s.
Anyways, that was a slight digression, but like, yeah. You were talking about the Sururis or
no. So we're kind of like dancing around the Middle East now, right? So a lot of people are saying, the Palestinians should just give up and succumb to Israeli rule. And what are your thoughts on that? It seems like there's even Muslims, particularly in the West, are kind of talking about, there's no light at the end of the tunnel for the Palestinians, and they should just bend to the will of the Israelis or keep getting mowed down.
Yeah, I see. I thought DJ Khaled and Fozy 2 were going to help out the Palestinians, but that didn't really happen.
No,
Fozy 2. Anyways, go ahead. Go ahead, sir.
I was in Israel-Palestine recently, and I was in the West Bank, and I can say one thing I'm very confident of, that they're never going to give up. They'll never surrender and do what people are trying to pressure them to do. Right now, Mohammed bin Salman and Jared Kushner are trying to put a gun to their head and force them to surrender and accept some humiliating ending to the conflict where they get basically nothing. They're never going to surrender. And any deal which their leaders are forced into making, maybe, it won't be worth the paper that it's printed on. They've been fighting for 70 years for the basic right to self-determination. And they put up with incredible oppression. And they're such noble people and have such inner fortitude. I'm absolutely certain they won't surrender, even given the incredible amount of repression that's currently going on in the West Bank, and not to speak of Gaza, which is magnitudes worse. They are, unless there's a fair and just ending to this conflict, there's not gonna be an ending to it. And now today, as of 2015, so even more so today, Palestinian Arabs are the majority between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean, so the territory of Israel and the West Bank and Gaza. There are more Arabs than Israelis, or more Arabs than Jews. So you can't continue with this apartheid-like situation. It's absolutely apartheid. There's no hyperbole in saying it. The West Bank is completely under the control of the Israeli Ministry of Defense. And people don't have any rights or any dignity or any ability to move around or live normal lives. So people in some Arab countries, they're really trying to turn the screws on the Palestinians. They want to align with Israel because they're more concerned about Iran. They're tired of this. They want to just move on. But they're not going to move on by trying to make the Palestinians commit suicide. They're not going to commit suicide. They're not going to, no matter what you do to them, they're not going to accept a deal when they have no access to Jerusalem or no access to their own territory and freedom movement and basic human rights. So, they can try. Mohammed bin Salman and these other people can try, but I don't think that they're going to get very far.
You seem very, very convinced. That's pretty awesome. You seem very convinced that they're not going to give up and it'll go on forever. What experiences have you had there that you have so much conviction in that? And I actually respect that a lot. You said it without even hesitating. But what experience have you had in Palestine, or even if you want to highlight some interesting things that you experienced there, but what gives you so much conviction? And the reason I'm asking, I apologize. Let me preface by saying that the average person that were to start reading up on Palestine and Israel now, they would say, well, the whole world really wants Palestine to have a better life. Palestinians want a better life. Why don't they just give Israel what they want so Palestinians can have a better life, right? So that's how they're trying to sell it to the Muslims too. But for you, you have another side to the story.
Well, they do need a better life, but the thing is, what's being offered to them right now is not that. What's being offered to them is complete just surrendering and bowing down and living forever in humiliation. Well, if you study the history of the Palestinian national movement, they had the opportunity to live in humiliation, bow down every day since 1947. They haven't taken it. If you go to Ramallah today, you can see on pretty much any short walk or drive around, you can see signs that with the names of people's villages which were destroyed during the creation of the State of Israel and then the 1967 war, when many more people were made refugees, and they have the name of the village, and then underneath that in Arabic, we will return. The entire national culture is built around Jerusalem, the issue of Jerusalem and Al-Quds, and the territory of Palestine. I've also been to Jordan. I've seen in the slums around Amman the way that every single person wants nothing more than to go back to, if not Palestine, at least the same village, but be around the symbols of their identity, like Al-Quds and Jerusalem and the land. They're not going anywhere. And Jewish people were also exiles from Jerusalem for thousands of years, and they never lost the flame of going back. They go back. And now Palestinians are an exile community which desires to go back to that place, and they're not going to accept something that they're not going to give up after sacrificing so much and just say they're exhausted and surrender. They'll keep fighting for generations. The way people view time over there, and not just the Palestinians, is very different. They'll fight for generations to go back. And I've talked to people in Jordan who are involved in movements, and we have stories about this coming out in the future. They, at the Intercept, they have a very long time frame. So if we don't go back, then our kids will fight, then their kids will fight, until there's a just negotiated solution. There's no one's fighting this to the end. There needs to be a solution which gives dignity and the basic minimum requirements of the Palestinian national movement. And then there can be peace, and there can be reconciliation on all sides and healing and development. But
I think a lot of people.
Yeah,
I think a lot of people don't understand that even if the Palestinians completely gave up their right to an independent Palestinian state, and that they said, okay, Israel, absorb us into your state, that still is not a viable option that the Israelis want to pursue. That's because they would be outnumbered, and it's funny to see that like people are saying that it's the Palestinians who are being a roadblock to peace, when even if they completely gave up everything they wanted, and they took it off the table and they said, okay, you win, the war of attrition is over, and we succumb to your will, that's still not a viable option, because then they'll be citizens of Israel, and that's not something what Israel wants. They don't want them to have influence in their legislature and the way they make laws and influence.
Dude, I'm so glad you brought that up, because their main point is to give them such a bad experience that they leave, right? Yeah. And they don't come back.
They want them to be Jordan's
Why would
problem.
Israel want to share citizenship with them and give them a possibility to empower themselves? Right. Because that's what citizenship is, right?
Yeah.
You're giving somebody citizenship, which means that, okay, now we can talk to the table. We're the same now. If we're the same now, that means you have a possibility to achieve what I've achieved.
Yeah.
Right? And that's very problematic for the Zionist regime, right? But I just wanted to mention one more thing, man, because you recently went to Palestine, you said. And is this the first time you went, or have you went many times?
No, it was the first time, actually.
So out of all of the experiences you had, what is something that highlights that experience for you?
I mean, there's just so many different things. It's, if you go to Jerusalem, which I think people should do, actually, because the Palestinians in East Jerusalem, they're really in a very difficult situation. The Israeli military is everywhere. There's a lot of poverty. They're not allowed to build houses or expand the houses that they have. Everyone's trying to push them out. There's a lot of bullying. Their economic situation is very bad, especially compared to West Jerusalem. And when I was there, especially going to the Haram Sharif, I was wondering, this place is so spiritual and so important to 1.2 billion people. Like, where are those people? They should be supporting the people here who are holding on to this and, giving them moral support, giving them economic support, and just being here in their presence. But you see that people are very committed to it. They're not going to let go of this place. They're not going to let go of their connection to this land. And, there are people who offer Palestinians living in East Jerusalem, for example, in the old city, tens of millions of dollars to move out of their homes that their families have lived in for generations. Really compelling offers financially. People won't take it. They're very committed to this. They're not going anywhere. And, it's just, if you go to Hebron too, people are living in homes that they're not even allowed walking on the main roads outside their homes. The doorways have been welded shut by the military, but they don't leave. They're not going to leave, and nothing is going to make them leave. No sweet offer is going to make them leave, and certainly no bad offer is going to make them leave. So people just have to there's three options. There's genocide against them, there's ethnic cleansing, or there's equality. And I think that it has to be equality, and maybe the world is tired of hearing about it, but if they're tired of hearing about it, they should put pressure for a real just peace that all sides can live with, not putting a gun to the head and trying to make the Palestinians just lie down.
You brought up an interesting point, just something that I've been kind of struggling with for many years. Like, how could 1.2 billion people, or however many Muslims there are in the world, just turn a blind eye? And I think the situation of Palestine is a reflection of this. Our indifference is in this conflict is an extension of our countries like Saudi Arabia and Pakistan and all these Muslim countries who are really looking out for their own self-interest. And I think one of the problems, and I think why a lot of people are looking to the rhetoric, at least over Erdogan, of why he's passionate about the Palestinian cause, and they're kind of aligning behind him, is because he has an interest, or he's displaying an Islamic interest. He's saying, or a Muslim interest, like, hey, these are issues that are things that people are passionate about, and right now we don't see any country in the world really having that kind of backbone in at least being vocal about it.
Yeah, and if I can just add on to what you're saying, Sim, I think that there's only a few solutions, and I think the most foolproof solution is that the people, the Arabs used to have a saying. They say, "An-nasu ala dini mulukihim." People are on the religion of their rulers, and people are not going to move. That's why we only see people like yourself, may Allah bless you, and people like, we actually had Mufti Wasim Khan on also, and he went to Palestine and talked about Palestine. But we have small groups of people that go to Palestine and talk about it to raise awareness. But that's raising awareness. It's awesome. And I think we should all do that. And I'm not knocking anyone for doing that. But I think that if we're talking solution, the only way that this can be dealt with, I think it's a lot bigger than the discussions have been in the past. I think it's an international discussion. It takes a lot more than Erdogan to say, and I'm not knocking your point, it takes a lot more than Erdogan to just be, despise the situation. You have to have an entity or a force or somebody, whether they're weak or strong, it doesn't matter.
Well,
to actually say, hey, listen, these are our brothers and sisters, and we are, we not even bold enough to say, hey, we're gonna give them their state back of which they deserved, and you can be. You can share land with them, but you're not going to be citizens because you have taken this place illegally. And that's what I'm saying. The reason I'm painting this picture, I'm sorry to keep rambling on, is because I think that's the seriousness of this matter, is that you have to have an entity that tells the Israelis, hey, listen, this is not your land. You're an illegal establishment that have stolen this land. You can live here peacefully, but you're not going to be a citizen of this country, and we're giving this back to the Palestinians. That means all the big brothers, including the United States and Russia, as you mentioned, other entities, are not going to be happy with that statement. Yeah. And nobody in the Muslim world, or any other country for that matter, is willing to do that.
Yeah. Well, the problem is that Erdogan's not even taking an initial step of breaking trade ties or stopping or increasing tariffs on Israeli products or anything. It seems like, well, you're just saying it's just hot air, really, and all you're doing is just playing to a certain crowd. That
it is playing to a certain crowd. At least I think it should be a little stronger, so at least it gives people some hope. But he's kind of playing this balancing act, and he has to, for whatever reason. But you can do that. And it's not really going to solve the problem, though, right?
Yeah.
It may empower some of us. I know back in the day when Erdogan was talking all this big game, I was like, yeah, this guy is awesome. But then after a while, it just, he's a part of a system, unfortunately, that's not going to let him grow too much more than he is right now. But, I've been rambling on for a long time. I vented. I ranted what I needed to say. Again, those are my personal views.
What are your thoughts on Turkey? What's that?
It's complicated. There's hello?
No,
no,
nothing. Go ahead.
Oh, we thought you hung up on
I think that. Oh no, I'm still here. Domestically or internationally.
Just internationally, and how they're dealing with Israel and some of the rhetoric that's coming from Erdogan. Is there any? Should we have any faith in him actually following up on his words, or is it just him playing to a certain crowd?
I think if they did put tariffs on Israel or cut ties with Israel, I'm not sure that would really accomplish much. If you look like Pakistan, for instance, has no ties with Israel. I don't think Israel is really harmed by that. I don't think that they really care. Same with Iran. Iran sort of tries to antagonize Israel militarily. I don't think that really, in my opinion, I don't think it's helping anybody, including the Palestinians. I will say that Turkey, they have ties with Israel. If you go to Jerusalem, the two groups of foreign communities I saw a lot in East Jerusalem were Turks and British Pakistanis. Because Britain and Turkey have some sort of visa reciprocity with Israel, so Muslims from those countries can go. And it makes a big difference because they go and they shop at the Palestinian stores, which no one else shops at. They're sort of around Al-Aqsa. They're there in numbers of people so that you can't really, to some degree, people are bullying Palestinians. There's some witnesses to that. And they have an impact on the economic life of people, a material impact. And I do understand the calls to boycott and cut economic ties. But that's actually been going on for a very long time. Since the beginning of Israel's creation, no one's had any economic ties with them. And I think that if you're talking about actually empowering the Palestinians, there are ways you should maybe invest in Palestine or support, their businesses, or help defend them with your body against being bullied or being harassed, and just by your presence and being witness to it. So, I don't really know about the government of Turkey per se, but I will say that the people definitely very strongly support Palestinians, and I think that their economic impact that they have is very important, because if people are poor and they don't know where the next meal is coming from, they can't really resist oppression either. They need to be empowered in every way. So yeah.
Well, you had a recent article about the looming death of democracy and how democracy is slowly dying around the world. I want to shift the discussion a little bit towards that article, because I found some of the things that you're talking about in it really profound, in the sense how technology is kind of aiding the destruction of democracy. And I mean, nobody who's informed can really argue against it, in the sense, I mean, when you are kind of following the Trump regime and you're following some of the events that are happening around the world, you're like, yeah, that's pretty obvious. But I think people don't really understand the scale of it, per se. Can you talk a little bit about about that article that you wrote?
Yeah, it's very good. People really fetishize democracy, full stop, and they seem to think it's perfect. The idea that democracy has no flaws and no serious flaws would be completely absurd to any classical political thinker. Everyone recognizes that democracy has serious flaws. It may be the least bad system of all of the systems, but there's the passions of people and the masses are very tempestuous, and they're very hard to control. And what we're seeing now, and we saw a little taste of it in the last election, and we're going to see more of it than we could ever imagine, is that this information environment that we talked about, this deluge of information coming from all sides of questionable quality that we're now experiencing with the internet, and that we touched upon at the start of the podcast. The average person's brain is not built to compute this. It's not built to be able to handle this much. And you ask people to make a rational choice about an election. It's hard enough when you know the facts. When you don't know the facts and you don't know where this information is coming from, it's almost impossible. And the things we're going to see in the next couple of years, in terms of fake news, fake videos, fake algorithms, impersonating public figures, I don't see how the average person is going to be able to make an informed choice unless there's some serious change in how this technology is implemented. And what you may see is we may continue having elections, but you may see that the actual power in society is no longer in elections. It's in private sources in Silicon Valley. It's concentrated in, foreign capital. So, I'm not optimistic that democracy as we know it's going to survive.
So a lot of folks say America, though, isn't really a democracy, it's a republic. And so, what does that even mean?
Yeah, that's true. There were checks and balances imposed to protect, the Electoral College was one of the big, intended to be one of the big checks on pure democracy. But if you look at the way things function today, the Electoral College has been pretty much hollowed out of its the purpose it was supposed to serve. It's pretty much unthinkable that the delegates would vote against how the electorate chose. And, people were hoping for that in the last election. It didn't really happen. So the Republican aspects of the government have sort of been degraded over time. The thing is, you're just going to see it with people are not able to even get to the first question of how do you make an informed choice. And doing that's hard enough in a functioning democracy. And I don't think we're going to stop having elections. We're just going to see that, the elections mean less and less.
Well, I think one of the main things that the founders or the founding fathers of this country didn't really factor in was the influence of capitalism on democracy, right? Because democracy really adopted capitalism as its backbone, right? In the way business is conducted in the world, and commerce is
just the way we
instated,
view
right?
money and assets. Yeah,
Right, and I think capitalism literally absorbed democracy and allowed powerful people to, gain foothold in the democratic system and really guide the course of actions that politicians take. So it's really, the creed of capitalism is what, like, greed is good. Make sure that your interests are taken care of. Go ahead.
What happens is that capitalism creates elites, economic elites in society, and when those elites, they determine that they have shared interests, and then they organize themselves. And in a democracy, there are certain institutions which are for the public good, and they're supposed to be neutral arbiters of the public good and exist for the benefit of all of us. When elites organize and capture those institutions and subvert their purposes and turn them into vehicles for their own empowerment, they kind of hollow out the democracy from the inside. And when the ordinary people are not similarly organized and they're all sort of scattered and they don't really perceive what their interests are, and they're not in a position to act on that, they don't really have any response. So in the United States, you have institutions like Congress and others which are supposed to be vehicles for the public will, but except in name, they no longer are, because elites have captured them. Elites have organized themselves and they have subverted them. And when that happens, there's a very good book about this by Francis Fukuyama called Political Order and Political Decay. There's not really any going back. Like, it's very difficult, aside from some sort of shocking revolutionary situation, which doesn't seem very likely, for these dead institutions to be brought back to life. They're just vehicles for people's immiseration, and things just decay over time. And I think the United States is in a state of institutional decay. And that doesn't mean that the future means we're all going to be, starving and living in some sort of apocalypse. But I do think that, you've already seen it. And, there's a term called zombie democracy, where the people are not involved anymore. They're just sort of like spectators watching a play, and sometimes they'll clap and sometimes they'll boo. And that's sort of what exists today. And it's because our institutions have been captured by people who are very rich and who are able to perceive their own class interests much better than ordinary people are.
Yeah, and I remember from your article, how you were talking about the book How Democracy Ends by David, how do you pronounce the name, Runciman?
Yeah, Runciman.
Yeah, and you were mentioning something that I think that a lot of people are kind of catching on to now, but they don't know how to deal with it, is that it's become a type of, the politics and democracy has become a type of entertainment now, right? And you were mentioning how Barack Obama was kind of seen as a celebrity president, right? Lacing some of his words with some type of religiosity, excuse me. And then literally you have an entertainer like Trump who gets into office, and it continues to be more and more of a spectator sport, and that the politics has become a spectator sport in this democracy. And
sorry, go ahead.
No, and I like how you use the word pageant. It just reminded me that it's literally like a pageant, and who can be the best performer in this acting role, and who can keep the people entertained, whether we like it or not. The type of entertainment that Trump chose was inciting certain type of feelings in people of some people who loved him and some people who hated him, and that became just watch the people fight over this team now, right? And that's kind of how I see it too, man. That's how it has become now.
You know, in this environment where people are so distracted by different sources of information, he was able to do the most important thing, that whether you liked him or you hated him, he had your attention.
Yeah,
and he cut all the things going on, and he still to this day does it. Even today, he has everyone's attention, everything he does.
Yep.
So
he's not afraid of having all those videos up about him and Putin, and I think he's loving all this attention, man.
As long as you are thinking about him and not the other person, he's actually winning. People have not figured out any way to get past this, and I don't know if we're going to be able to get past it.
Yeah.
It is the most important book, one of the most important books I've ever read, and I mentioned in the article, is this book called Amusing Ourselves to Death, Public Discourse in the Age of Show Business. It was written in the 80s, before the internet even. It was written about TV news, but I think it's still very apt. It says that, in the previous eras, like in an era before television, let's say, when you were thinking about who's going to lead the country, you were seeing probably written scripts. Like you would rarely ever see the person who led the country. They'd just be someone you read about in the newspaper. Maybe you'd read their proclamations or read something that somebody, what they put together as their platform. And you think about them in that way. So you wouldn't really know if they're good looking or if how they spoke or, how they dressed. You would just know about the bare facts of what they're proposing. With the advent of television, this whole new dynamic came into play. Well, when you're looking at someone on television, the most important thing is not even the substance of what they're saying. The most important thing is how charismatic they are, how they say things, and the medium itself was very much geared towards entertainment. So the person you're seeing, if they're not entertaining on a screen or they're not engaging on a screen or charismatic on a screen, it doesn't matter what they're saying. If they're like mumbling and they're unattractive and ruffled, you're going to dismiss them for the next person. So Barack Obama and Donald Trump, what they have in common, I think Trump is extremely charismatic. He has a very unorthodox charisma, but even during the election campaign, we're all laughing at his antics, the way he's insulting the other guys, like he's a wrestler, calling them Little Rubio or whatever.
Low energy Jeb.
Low energy Jeb.
Yeah.
Even now we're laughing. It's very funny. He's a very funny person, and he sort of got that, WWE persona, and it really worked. And Obama was, in a sense, he was entertaining, not in the sense that he was making you laugh, but he was like, the hero in a movie who came and the savior, and he just made you feel like, this guy is just inspiring me so much, and he's just such a great orator. He speaks so well. And it didn't even matter what he was saying. What he was saying was not that remarkable. And when he governed, it wasn't that remarkable. He just had a very remarkable way of saying it. He ended up being just a pretty much standard Democratic president. And, someone who's boring, if they're offering you the best thing in the world, if they're boring today, no one's going to listen to them. So you have to be entertained. And that book really explained how this dynamic came into play, that the most important thing that people want everything is entertainment. Yeah. I just see that, he died before the internet even became a thing, but he foresaw the sort of mess we're in today.
I dabbled in that book a little. That's like Neil Postman, right? I think his son wrote a foreword to his latest edition, and I think because in the 80s it was Ronald Reagan, because Reagan was like the Hollywood president.
Yeah.
Look at the people who he beat. They're like boring old farts. Like who was the Walter Mondale?
Yeah.
And then like I forgot who he beat. Carter. He beat Carter, right, in 80.
Yeah, he beat Carter.
And the 84 was Mondale, and it was like, but Reagan was a slick dude.
He had nice hair.
But you think about the earlier presidents, and it's interesting. I just thought about this. It's like, you got like Millard Fillmore, who was like stuck in a freaking bathtub. He was so fat. Like a fat dude would never win a presidency these days.
Yeah.
A fat, bald presidency is unthinkable. It's never going to happen.
Yeah, it's like
they look bad on screen, and that's what people actually care about.
Yep,
it's not that they're consciously that's what they care about, but their mind, their lizard brain is just doesn't trigger them. So, if you don't look good and if you don't have a charisma, forget about it. And if you do have charisma, even if what you're saying is total garbage, you really have a shot.
Hence
So
the
I
pageant.
foresee more.
Yeah. So I was talking to one of my employees at work today about like Trump, because I didn't really follow what was going on with Russia again. Like, I guess people are like making a big fuss about something he said. You know, I was more concerned about Ronaldo's Juventus jersey being sold out. But I asked my coworker, "Do you hear anything?" And he like tells me a little bit about it, and I'm like, "All right." But I was like, so I just watched this Netflix documentary on Trump. It's like a 5-part series, like Netflix original, talking about Trump from the 70s on. I think they've had camera crews like, well, he's been a public figure for that long, and this isn't like some act. That's who he is, right? But the interesting thing that you just mentioned about his likability, people think he's like, oh, he's just like Mr. Orange or this guy that, or he just looks like they always see these pictures of him looking like really like ridiculous. Mm-hmm. But I remember, I think it was the Taj Mahal casino, or I think it was that he owned back in like Atlantic City, and it was apparently like a financial disaster. But and so there's this financial analyst in New York who like critiqued it on like some news channel, and this is funny. So Trump hits this dude with like a $250 million lawsuit, right? And then Trump's people calls this guy up, like, hey, Donald says he'll like rescind the lawsuit if you agree to meet with him. And so the guy says he meets Trump, and he's like, he was like the nicest guy in the world. It's like, I didn't even think this is the guy that was trying to sue me. And the thing is, Trump actually, what he did was he recognized the individual was like a financial guru. He knew what he was talking about, and he wasn't BSing. And he actually hired him. And the guy was like, oh, and he was like, even though I like knew he was kind of like his financial decision making was like ridiculous, he was so charismatic that he got me. And I agreed to work. Right. He was working at some like high profile firm, and he quit on the spot to go work for Trump.
Wow.
Even though he knew that Trump had made like all these bad financial decisions with these casinos and whatnot in the 80s, right? And it's the same thing. Marla Maples talks about this. That was just like his second wife. How like you know, I think she was on some TV show, and he was like, yeah, he's just so nice and so adorable. He's the most likable person I met in my life. And I'm like, dang, that's probably what it is. Like, and you think about him is like when you see him promoting people, right? Talking about people that he likes, he just talks them up big time. Yeah. And if he wants to trash you, he just goes all in. But he can flip back and forth, like, right? Like him and Hillary used to be tight back in the day before he was in politics. Like I think Hillary came to his wedding and all this stuff, and you know, even after the election, he like right after he was like commending her for a good race and all that stuff, and then like finally
you're supposed to do that.
Well, his base was like, oh, lock her up.
You do that,
yeah.
You know,
for him it was different.
You know, but his base was like, oh, lock her up, and then so now like every chance he gets, he just deflects back to her emails, right?
Yeah.
And also, I just, if you guys don't mind, to talk about the article. You mentioned something in the article to the degree of, you know, people's votes because of Facebook and Google and algorithms being built on what people like. That people's voting is no longer going to be the voting that we see now. It'll be more of like an algorithm to convince people's mindsets of who to vote for. Can you just elaborate on that point briefly, if you don't mind?
So, you know, from your Google search history, from your Facebook interactions over years and years and years, these algorithms, the algorithms are created. So they basically, that's how they suggest you what you want to buy on Amazon or suggest articles you might be interested in. And because the algorithm actually learns about you by compiling a profile based on every single little interaction you have, every message you send, or every link you click or whatsoever. And these algorithms actually know you better than yourself. They can predict what you're going to buy. They can predict where you want to go to school, what kind of person you'd be friends with,
what kind of girl you like,
what kind of girls you like, and they can also predict, what based on you, this person that we know so much about, what would be the best political candidate for you. And an algorithm can make you a suggestion, based on your income and where you live and all the things that you're interested in and your aspirations and hopes for the future. This person's platform is best for you, so you should vote for them. Now, you could say the algorithm, well, I want my own choice. But the thing is, the algorithm is able to think more clearly than you are yourself, because you can't think about your whole life in perspective in one moment. It's very difficult for anyone to do that. There's emotions, there's memory. There's all sorts of factors at play because we're imperfect humans. But the algorithm has an unblinking eye, which can always can see more clearly than you can yourself. So if you're saying to the algorithm, theoretically, if you were to say, well, no, I reject your choice, most likely you're making the wrong decision. So if the algorithm's actually able to make better decisions than you are, what's the point of you? Why don't you just let the algorithm just decide for you? And this extends not just to voting. There are programs which, AIs in development or being discussed, which could, choose a spouse for you, or it can talk to other AIs which know other people and, find the best person for you or find the best job for you. And then you could say to the AI, to the algorithm, well, no, I reject. But then how do you know you're probably wrong? They probably does know better than you. So, in that sort of environment, when there's so much data about us and, programs which are not in our control know us and can control us better than we can ourselves, it's just like, democracy becomes superfluous. Like, what's the point of even democracy? You just let the algorithms decide everything.
Yeah.
And they might do a better job.
But not only that, it's taken the human element out of us completely. We need to make mistakes. We need to be human, right? And I think that, this whole approach, it's getting that way, with everything. But when you brought up, the lack of exposure that presidents used to have, just people in general, there's so much exposure on so many levels, especially for presidents and celebrities, that it's just, it doesn't allow people to have a private life anymore, which was a human thing to do. It was a human part of life to have privacy and not be so exposed and overexposed in your life, because then you don't really have a life anymore then, right?
In the near future or the foreseeable future, we're going to head to a world where there are like mini cameras everywhere. That's like the next thing. The Internet of Things. It's like, imagine like every button or every door hinge has a camera in it. So every single moment of your life is recorded on a video. Yeah. Like, of course you're going to behave differently. You're never going to behave the same again. Your privacy is very fast.
I feel like we're being stripped of like humanness. And
my dad says TVs are like that now. They have TVs that he's like I don't know if he's just blowing smoke, but he's like, oh, don't buy like Samsung because they have cameras built in and they can see what you're doing.
I know the Xbox was trying to do that. Microsoft's Xbox had this camera that couldn't actually detect your movements, and it was supposed to integrate into games and all kinds of other motion, but what your example reminded me of was a show called Black Mirror on Netflix. I don't know if you saw that, but I definitely recommend any listeners out there to watch that show. It's kind of maybe a little bit of an exaggeration, but it's not that far off from the future.
Oh, no, I don't think so. I think Black Mirror is now. Black Mirror is maybe underselling it in some ways.
Yeah. And I think we're almost living a parody of what we thought would be the dystopian future, but we're actually living it now.
Right. So, Murtaza, before we wrap up here, I just want to tie back to the very beginning. A lot of kids listen to our show, like maybe in college, younger folks, interested in getting kind of field work you're doing. You talked a little bit about how you got your start in writing blogs and whatnot. Is your background in journalism? Is that what you went to school for, or did you study something else?
No. Again, most kids of immigrant parents or kids who are immigrants themselves, you can't really go into journalism or do whatever you want to do. So I studied economics, actually. Studied business and economics, and I hated it. I was not good at it. But I just did it because, the family, working class background, I needed to just do anything to get a job right now. But I always moonlighted as a writer. My dream was always to be a journalist. I loved reading the news and, following what's going on in the world. I really admired the journalists that I knew growing up or that I read growing up. But it was never like a realistic thing because we were just working class people. But, I always kept writing. And I remember talking to my father about this a long time ago. And, I was like, I just wish I could write for a living. And, I'm just like so sad that I can't do that. He's like, I don't believe you, because if you really wanted to write, you would just write. And like, even if you had to do it at night or on the weekend, and you would just do it if you really liked it. I was like, that's kind of a good point. So I just started doing it. So that was many, many years ago. And I just wrote a blog, and I was just, I saw I had basically no views. I had like 5 views or 7 views, but I was kind of happy with that. I was like, wow, if 7 people out there read what I wrote, that's something. And I was just doing it for the enjoyment. But then if you're really passionate about something and you do it consistently and you put work into it, people eventually listen. The best thing of the internet, for all the bad things about it, that you can actually get in touch with people and they can see your work, and people who never would have seen it in the era of newspapers, they actually would see it. And if it's good and you keep working on it, they'll want you to write for them, or you can expand upon that. So what I'll tell people out there, we really need people to write. We need people, especially those people who don't really have normally a voice in the media, to have a voice, because media is quite blinkered, and they doesn't really reflect the experiences of many people out there, especially you could say Muslims or people from the Muslim world. So, I would just say everyone should really read and write a lot, and just do it on your own, and don't do it to be famous or to be recognized or anything. Just do it for the sake of the passion of doing it and wanting to say something, and study and write and read, and it'll have impact. And if you're good at it, you will get noticed, and that opportunity exists today, and people should take advantage of it, because a lot of people, not just me, who probably never would have had a platform before, do have platforms now, and that door is still open for people who work hard at it.
It's unfortunate that the parents, like the old generation, still thinks that way. I was visiting my folks this past weekend, and my dad and I always have this disagreement. He's like, and I'm like, he's like, aren't you happy with what you're doing? I'm like, well, it's all right. It's boring. He was like telling me like, oh, you should advise your younger brother to get more into IT. I'm like, IT sucks, Dad. It's boring as hell.
No,
right?
I mean, speaking from someone in IT, the main thing that really gets you going in IT is competition against your peers. I mean, when you are competing against people who have better logic than you want to outperform them. You want to show your skill set. There's a lot of like rivalry in IT that kind of propels you in doing what you do. But other than pride in what you're doing, there's really not a whole lot of other incentive to actually pursue IT.
Yeah, my dad's philosophy is like all work is boring, and if you're making money, you won't be bored, which is completely untrue.
I agree with that.
You do?
I agree with that. Partially.
Okay.
Not all the way.
Yeah, it's true. If you're freaking broke and you're just like for scraps, you can't really. Then that's another issue too.
It makes sense. Like it makes absolute sense.
It's a logical argument.
We need some people to do other things because as a community, like if you don't have soft power and people recognize you or respect you, it can really impact you down the line. And I think especially Muslim Americans, they're so disrespected that a president could get elected on a platform of literally banning them from the country. So even if you have economic power, if you don't have soft power, that could all be lost. Now I'll give you an example. The Jews of Europe, they were very rich. Western European Jews, Eastern European Jews, they were an economic elite. But they didn't have, they weren't able to penetrate and get cultural and soft power to the degree that, they had to be respected. People disrespected them. They really targeted them. And then one day when the wheel turned, something horrible happened. So, for all the money you have, money can just go away like that.
You're right.
But what you need to have, in addition to that, you have to have people respect you. And the way you do that is you have to have cultural power. And we need, journalists and writers, but also, actors and sports people. They all play a role in sort of, giving a baseline respect. Because Muslims in America do not even have the basic level of respect on a national level. Maybe individuals have respect, but as a class of people, they're a despised minority. You do not want to be a despised minority in a country that may one day have an economic or environmental disaster, because the first people who go are you.
I don't mean to laugh because it's funny. It's just a really interesting plot turn, and I just thought about that.
That's a great point to close it off on. So, Murtaza, how can people find out more about you or reach out to you?
You can read my articles on the Intercept.com, but probably the best way is on Twitter, because I post most of my stuff there. It's at MAZMHUSSAIN. Hussain, Maz M Hussain. So yeah, you follow me on there, and anyone wants to message me, my email is also in there. I'm more than happy to talk to anybody about stuff we talked about today or anything else.
Yeah.
Sure. Sounds good. Well, stand on line real quick. We'll wrap it up with you offline, but we'll wrap it up here for the show for our special guest, Murtaza Hussain. We thank you for coming on. For our listeners out there, you can email us at themadmumlooks@gmail.com. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. Leave us a 5-star review in iTunes. And for my co-host, Sheikh Amr Saeed and Sim, this is Mahin signing off. Assalamu alaikum.